Hello and welcome everyone to this new webinar. Today we're going to talk about peer feedback evaluation, but not just by peers. You'll see we have some other interesting cases where it's not only about peer feedback evaluation. I'll present all of that to you in a little while. So let's start right away by giving you a quick introduction to the challenge.me solution. Next, we'll define a bit of the context around why we want to evaluate feedback, what are the issues and possibly the solutions we propose. I'll also present some use cases that I've selected for feedback evaluation, a few quite interesting ones, some criteria that we can use in feedback evaluation, how we can use these criteria, and how we might weight the students' scores, how to take into account the scores that have been given on the students' feedback. And then we'll take a quick tour of the platform itself, where I'll really show you how you can create this type of evaluation. Can everyone see my screen clearly? It's true that I didn't specify that. Is that okay for everyone? Great. Quickly, to talk a little about the Challenge Me solution, first let me introduce myself. My name is Florent and I am a coach at Challenge Me. I am responsible for supporting both teachers and students on the platform. So in using the platform, we are a French solution for evaluation and feedback. We are directly integrated with most school tools via the LTI protocol, so tools like Moodle, Blackboard, Brightspace, which allows for fairly smooth use, and we don't require students or teachers to create an account on our platform. It's completely integrated into the course, and actually when you add an activity to the course, you just have to click on the activity and you're connected directly. The platform allows you to manage multiple scenarios, from the simplest like group member evaluation or oral presentations, but also feedback evaluation, which is what we'll look at today, as well as much more advanced scenarios. I'll talk a little more about that later when I present the platform in more detail. We work with a phase-based system that can be adjusted as desired, which makes it possible to create much more advanced scenarios that can extend over several months, and so on. So there's a great deal of flexibility, both in how it's used and in the possible use cases with the platform. It's been used by most French-speaking business schools and universities. So when I say French-speaking, that includes France, but also Belgium, Switzerland, and a little bit in Canada as well. So we'll start directly with feedback. So why evaluate feedback? First of all, what is the purpose of feedback? Today, feedback is really at the heart of peer assessment. This is what students are currently being asked to do as part of peer assessment. What's very important is the feedback they will give. And we realize that giving good feedback isn't necessarily something that's simple or intuitive for everyone. So it's something that can be learned and developed. And so feedback evaluation will make all this possible, because we know that giving good feedback can really make a big difference. In fact, generally, people who have received good feedback are able to improve their work and so on. So it's quite important. And so the problem, as I was saying, is that often the quality of feedback between students is quite variable. Some people are comfortable with it, others much less so. There's also the question of year level. In fact, we know that first-year students will have a harder time. We're often told, oh, no, we don't enable feedback yet for first-year students. They're not mature enough and so on. There's a bit of fear about what might be said, etc. So it's something that needs to be well managed. And so that's the issue. But the solution is simply to introduce, in fact, a phase for evaluating this feedback, as I mentioned, to close the loop a bit and to have an analysis not only of the work that was done, but also of the feedback given by the students. So here I'm going to talk a lot about peer feedback evaluation. So the idea is that students will evaluate the feedback given by their peers, but you'll see that there are other use cases where the teacher can also be included to evaluate the feedback given by their students. So I'll present 4 formats for feedback evaluation. The first one, the classic, is the evaluation of received feedback. So here we're really going to evaluate the feedback we've received. So the student will submit an assignment or give a presentation in class. They will receive feedback from classmates, from everyone involved in the evaluation, and then the student will evaluate this feedback by indicating whether it was relevant, clear, whether it helped them improve, and so on. So here, it's really about evaluating the feedback received. This is the first building block of feedback evaluation, and it's the one we most commonly see. Self-evaluation. Now that's something a bit more specific. These days, we do more and more self-assessment of skills and so on. but we can also implement self-evaluation of the feedback we've given. So this is a bit particular because here we're going to ask students to always complete an assignment to evaluate their peers' work, so to receive feedback and then to get their results. So at this point, they'll be able to review the feedback they've received and so on their assignments. And finally, we'll tell them, now that you've received your feedback, you'll be able to evaluate your own feedback. This way, I can compare the feedback I gave with all the feedback I received, and I can actually say, yes, I can clearly see that the feedback I received is much higher quality than the feedback I gave. And so in this way, we'll be able to self-assess a bit on the feedback we give and see where we stand in terms of how we provide feedback, whether we know how to do it or not. So it's a bit unusual, but it could be something interesting to implement. Third-party feedback. So here we're still talking about peer evaluation, but instead of evaluating the feedback we've received, we'll be evaluating feedback that was given by other people in the class in a fairly random way. We'll still be able to look at the work that was evaluated to have some context, but our main focus will be on assessing the feedback that was given on that work. This way, we'll really be working on the feedback itself, and we'll be able to evaluate in this manner all the feedback that was given in the class without it being personal. It's true that when evaluating feedback we've received, there can be a personal bias. For example, if some feedback is a bit critical, we might take it badly. Whereas here, when using third-party feedback, we're evaluating feedback that wasn't specifically given to us. So we might be more objective in the way we evaluate this feedback. And then there's the classic method, feedback evaluation by the teacher. Here it's pretty standard. Students complete an assignment, they evaluate each other, and the teacher comes in not only to possibly evaluate the assignments as well, but mainly to assess the feedback given by the students to get a sense of how things are going. I'm going to go into a bit more detail about how these formats are constructed, but I'll explain the main idea, especially regarding the evaluation of received feedback. This process takes place in 4 steps. As I mentioned, students submit an assignment either as a group or individually. Then individually, they will provide feedback on the assignments submitted by other students or other groups. And then in a third step, I will evaluate, or rather the student will evaluate, the feedback they received from their peers, explaining a bit about the usefulness of the feedback they got, whether it was of good quality or not. And finally, there is a results phase where everyone can review things a bit, the grades they received on their work along with the various feedback, but also the grades they received on the feedback they gave on their evaluations and so on. This is more or less the standard format and the one most commonly found on the platform. We have some very specific templates that address this particular need. There are 3 others. I'll show them quickly just to give you an idea of the different steps. For self-evaluation, as I mentioned, the feedback phase comes completely at the end after reviewing the results, after looking at the feedback we've received. We then self-evaluate to assess ourselves a bit on that. Third-party feedback is similar, except that here, after receiving the feedback, instead of evaluating the feedback that concerns us, we evaluate the feedback given to our peers. And likewise, the teacher can also come in and evaluate the feedback whenever they wish, once it has been given on the platform, and at the end, we provide the results. If you have any questions, when I show you on the platform with these use cases, we can set them up directly. I'll show you how it works. Here are a few examples of evaluation criteria. I've chosen 3 because there are many, but here are 3. There's a 4th one I could have added. I thought of it afterwards, and I'll talk about it. The idea is to create criteria, but above all with observable elements so that it's easy for students to evaluate. So typically clarity. Level 1 is insufficient, the feedback is confusing, poorly worded or vague, etc. Constructiveness. It could be feedback that is only critical but doesn't offer any solutions. So there you go. That's a criterion that could be interesting. And of course, always the tone, the kindness, how we perceive the feedback we've been given, whether it's considered aggressive or not, whether it's neutral or encouraging. We always prefer it to be encouraging. Even if it's critical, we prefer it to be encouraging in the end. And the 4th one that I really like, actually, I realize I didn't write it down here, is whether the feedback matches the grade I received. That can also be very interesting to include, because you can get a rather average grade and a really great critique. And so in that case, there wouldn't be any correlation between the grade I received and the feedback. So that's something that can be implemented to see if students are actually giving feedback that matches the grade given. Because it's easy to give someone a 5 out of 10 and tell them, great job. In that case, there's no correlation at all. And on top of that, the feedback isn't constructive or anything. So that's a criterion that can also be put in place, and I recommend it. Obviously, there are plenty of other criteria. We already have lots of predefined criteria on the platform. You can use them as they are, but you can also absolutely create your own criteria with your own grading scales, etc. Here's a suggested grading strategy, actually, to really include the feedback score. You can absolutely use this feedback score to give a final grade for the deliverable. I completed an assignment. I did a really great job. I got 18 out of 20 on my work. However, in the feedback evaluation section, the feedback I gave was considered rather poor. For example, I might have received a 5 out of 20, and we can absolutely say, to make students aware that it's important to give good feedback, we're going to tell them the grade that you received on your evaluations, on your feedback, will count towards the final grade, and we can definitely include that. Obviously, we're not going to do a 50-50 split. We recommend maybe 80-20, 90% for the deliverable, 10% for the quality of the feedback given, and so on. It can be interesting to implement, and above all, it will motivate students a bit more to give good feedback. We can use the grade given by peers, but we can also simply use the grade given by the teacher when they assess the quality of their students' feedback. I'm not sure if this is something you already do or if it's something you've ever tried before, but it could be quite interesting. A quick note about the AI assistants we have on the platform that can help students formulate feedback. Just to be clear, these are not conversational agents. We're not talking about ChatGPT here. Here, the idea is that the student writes their feedback, thank you, and then uses a small assistant that will simply review their feedback and possibly suggest ways to improve it if certain points haven't been developed, and so on. So we clearly define the scope of what the assistant is supposed to do, and in this way it will help the student formulate more constructive feedback if they're having trouble getting started, and so on. So this can also be implemented if we really want to help students improve their feedback skills. Here's a quick checklist of what needs to be set up right away. So obviously it's important to carefully plan the different dates for each phase. Obviously it's always interesting to let students know that they will be assessed not only on their work, but also on the feedback they give. Maybe just knowing that their feedback will be evaluated will encourage them to pay a bit more attention. And to give their peers feedback, that is a bit more thoughtful. So it's important to plan this well, to tell them on this date you'll do this, on that date you'll evaluate your peers' work, and then you'll also evaluate your peers' feedback. Clearly define the criteria, and why not even build the evaluation rubric together with the students? Directly tell them you will be able to evaluate your peers' feedback. What criteria do you think should be used? What makes good feedback, etc. And we can, why not, create the evaluation rubric together with the students. Of course, you need to have time to do this, but it's always interesting for them to work on this. Present, so I mentioned this a bit during the planning stage, but it's really about presenting clearly the entire process to the students, to explain at which stages they will be involved in the different steps, in the various challenges. Supervise all of this to make sure everything goes smoothly, to ensure that participation is on track. The platform offers automatic reminders, but also a manual reminder button. So this can be useful if we notice that participation is rather low. Don't hesitate to check what's going on and to follow up with them directly. And then the feedback session. So debrief a bit with the students about all the results that were given. Why not even send them a short questionnaire to ask if they enjoyed the activity, if it helped them improve, what they found interesting about it, and so on. This way, you can get some feedback from the students about this type of assessment. The advantages of the platform for this are really, as I mentioned, in terms of reminders, there's a lot of autonomy, a complete automation of the entire assignment process, whether it's for tasks, feedback, and so on. Reminders by email, all of that happens automatically, so it's really convenient. We know that peer assessment can be done just with Excel files, etc. But you quickly end up overwhelmed by all the different files. It's really the platform that takes care of everything. It's truly convenient. We have detailed reports on the platform. You can see a bit, I'll show it in a moment, all the details of participation, the grades given, the feedback that was provided, the grades each student received for their feedback, and so on. But you can also export them in Excel format if you need to look at them offline, rework them, or add formulas to create more specific grades, and so on. You can do everything on the platform, but also directly on an Excel file that you can export. As I mentioned right at the beginning, you also have ready-to-use templates for each use case. Of course, we're not exhaustive when it comes to use cases. New ones are created every day, but we already have a fairly extensive library of templates that you can use directly to create your challenges. And it's always more interesting to start from a template rather than from scratch and then adjust the template as needed. Then we have an entire grading system, which I'll also mention briefly, including weighting. With the feedback score, you can really fine-tune this by assigning coefficients, setting criteria for different phases, and so on. You can really end up with the exact score you want, and the platform takes care of all the calculations for you. Do you have any questions about this? We'll move straight to the platform to show you a bit about the different ways you can create this type of challenge. If you have any questions while I switch screens, feel free to ask and I'll be able to answer you. Otherwise, don't hesitate to put them in the chat. I'm switching screens. So I'm going to put myself in Moodle. I'll give you this presentation directly. In Moodle, I'm going to log in as a teacher, and actually I'm really going to start from scratch. I'll log in as a teacher in a course, and I'll add a challenge me activity, and I'll show you a bit how I can set up a challenge that includes feedback evaluation. So I log in, I go to my Sandbox course here, and I'll switch to editing mode. And I'm simply going to add in the create your challenges section, I'm just going to add a new activity. And here I simply select challenge me, which is in the list of available activities. I'm going to give my activity a name. I'll call it peer evaluation. You can name it as you wish. Then I'll go back to the course, and now I'll just click on this activity here to configure my challenge. So now I've landed here. Everyone can see my screen. It has switched tabs correctly. You are now on the challenge.me platform and not on Moodle anymore. That's okay. Okay, so now I'm on the challenge creation page. As you can see, I already have some popular templates and certain templates that are really designed for specific use cases. But if needed, I can also start from scratch and create my challenge from a blank page or duplicate an existing challenge. If I've already created an identical challenge that I want to relaunch, I just click on duplicate an existing challenge, choose the challenge I want from the list, and it duplicates it directly. Then all I have to do is enter the new dates and new participants to launch this challenge. In my case, since I'm going to be touching on a bit of everything, I'll choose a fairly standard template, submission and evaluation of work. And to show you how the platform works, I'm going to add different phases to get what I want, including the evaluation of received feedback. So I'm going to click here on Create. And now I land on the challenge creation page, and I simply have to fill in the different steps listed at the top here to create my challenge. So for the general information here, I'll just enter the name of my challenge and a brief summary. Next is the planning step, and this is where I'll start to play around a bit with the platform. This is the default. So in this template, I have a submission phase, an evaluation phase, and a results phase. And here I simply need to add phases like this. I have the students who will submit their work from the 28th to the 5th. I can click on the phase to set the exact dates I want and enable or disable automatic notifications. Same for the evaluation phase and same for the results phase. What I want to do here is add a phase between the evaluation phase and the results phase. I want to add a phase for evaluating the feedback received. I'm going to click on add a phase. Here, different types of phases are offered, and as it happens, there's a phase that perfectly matches what I want, the phase for evaluating received feedback. Participants evaluate the feedback they received during an evaluation phase. So I'm going to click here. I'm asked for a name, and I'll leave the default name. It asks me, okay, which phase's feedback am I going to evaluate? Okay, I'm going to evaluate the feedback that was given during the evaluation of the assignments. So there you go. It's already checked. I only have one phase. The system can't get it wrong. I click on next, and now I have to set the date when I want the students to evaluate the feedback they've received. So I'll leave the default dates because they work for me here, and I'll confirm. And now I have a new phase here, evaluation of the feedback received, which has just been added here. So now I'm thinking my result date isn't correct anymore because actually I don't want the results to be available on the 12th. I really want the results to be available after the feedback evaluation phase is over. So I'm going to click on my result phase. I'm just going to shift it by 24 hours here and apply this change. And now I have my scenario, and I think logically the result phase should be at the end. No problem. I can take my phase, move it, and now I have something more accurate. And when I look closely, I see that my assignment submissions will last for 7 days, and my evaluations by peers will also last for 7 days. And for 1 day, I will ask students to evaluate all the feedback they have received, and at the end, the results can be viewed. Next, we have the instructions. So here you will define instructions for each step. There are default instructions for each of the phases here. Since I added a step manually here, there are no default instructions as I added it myself. So the idea here is for you to provide some instructions about what the students should do at this step, specifically here to evaluate. The feedback they have received is based on the criteria you will have defined. Next, here we have the participant step. And so here, quite simply, I will add the participants I want for each step. So I can enroll them individually for the submission phase if the work needs to be submitted individually, or as a group if the work needs to be done in groups. For example, I'll take the case where I want to enroll groups. Here, I'll select a few groups from my course. Here, I will enroll them. So now I have my students. I have 11 students who have been enrolled in my 4 groups here. In the work evaluation phase, I choose who should participate. So here, since it's peer evaluation, those who submitted work will also be the ones evaluating. So I'll select reuse the same participants. So I want to reuse the participants from the submission phase, and I want to enroll them individually. I want them to evaluate individually and not in groups. It has re-enrolled my 11 students. And same here, who should evaluate the feedback they received? It's still these same students. So it's the same students who participated in the submission phase, and I'm enrolling them. So there you go. I quickly enrolled all my students who needed to participate in this evaluation. Next, we have the criteria step. So here, as I mentioned, you can add your own criteria, or you can absolutely add predefined criteria from challenge.me, which would be for the evaluation of assignments. You can add collections of criteria, which are sets or packs of criteria that can be added with a single click to meet very specific needs. For example, let's say my assignment is a CV evaluation. I have a CV evaluation criteria pack that I can add directly. And just like that, it adds all the criteria available in that pack. And for evaluating received feedback, it's the same. I can add my own criteria if I've defined my own rating scales or use predefined criteria. And here, for example, I would select a few criteria. If I type feedback, I get clarity and precision of the feedback, constructiveness of the feedback, balance of the feedback, whether the feedback is consistent with the grade received, which I mentioned earlier, and so on. So we have quite a lot of options. So we can select the predefined criteria directly or create our own criteria. I'm going to add these 4 criteria here, which seem appropriate to me. And there you go, observable elements have already been added. This way, the student will evaluate each criterion based on the feedback they received. So that's how you add them directly. And at the end, you can also leave a comment. The student can leave a comment for the person who gave them that criterion. Of course, it's anonymous. When you evaluate feedback, you don't know who it is from. Gave us this feedback in order to maintain as much objectivity as possible. Next, we have a few options. I'll go over them quickly, but it's mainly about whether or not to lift the anonymity. By default, it's anonymous, but you might want to remove that anonymity. And in the result steps, we have different options. We can choose what we want to display to the students. Do we want to show them all the results, the grades, etc., or only their own feedback? And if needed, we can manage all the weighting. I mentioned this as well. So you can decide what the grade is out of and set the weighting for each phase to create a grade as you wish, whether you want it to be 80-20, etc. For example, assigning evaluators is quite standard. You set how many assignments each student has to evaluate. So here, by default, it's 3. You can adjust this number. You can set up the different AI agents, as I mentioned briefly earlier. This is for assistance with writing feedback. Here we have different agents that will take on certain roles. You can review the different roles, and when you find an agent that matches what you want, you add it to help the student make their feedback more relevant. You can add it directly, and that way, when students have written their feedback, they can click on that well-known little assistant button to get help from this assistant. The assistant will read their feedback and suggest ways to improve it. Obviously, it won't write the feedback or do the evaluation in place of the student. So that's it for the agent part. Once you're done, you can publish your challenge. There's a little preview button to see what it looks like. When you're here, you can get a glimpse of what the students will see. And so here, students will be able to see the progress of their ongoing tasks, the different stages of their challenge, including the submission phase, the evaluation phase, but especially the phase where they evaluate the feedback they've received, etc. So that's it for now. I just gave a quick overview. The idea isn't to give you a full tour of the platform. It's just to show you how you can create this type of evaluation. If you have any questions or if you'd like to go into a bit more detail, don't hesitate to make an appointment and we'll be happy to go over everything with you live. Are there any questions about this? Or is everything clear for you? It's noon now. We've reached the half-hour mark. I'm not going to continue any further. If everything is okay for you, I'll let you go so you can have lunch. Don't hesitate if you have any questions. I'll give you another 10 seconds in case there's anything, if you have anything to add. Perfect. Otherwise, I'll say see you very soon. Feel free to check out our various webinar calendars. I think you receive different communications about that. Be sure to sign up for the upcoming webinars. There are quite a few held regularly. There are also teacher feedback sessions. It might be interesting for you to take part in all of this to get a sense of the different use cases and the benefits some teachers have found on the platform. If that's all right with you, all that's left for me to do is, as I said, wish you a good lunch, a great day, and don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.